We are in week 3 of our series, The Table, and we are looking at the life of Jesus through the lens of the table and the meals he shares in the Gospel of Luke. About 20% of the verses in Luke's Gospel are all centered around Jesus either going to, eating a meal, or leaving a meal of some kind. And so for about 2 months, we're going to look at the different times that we find Jesus at the table. And the goal of this is not only that you and I would find Jesus at the table, but that we would also find ourselves as we read these stories as people who are at the table with Jesus, and that we would not only be people who are at the table with Jesus, but also people who are inviting others to come and share the same table with Jesus. The table in every culture is a symbol of relationship. And so to share a meal with someone is to be with someone. It's to be interested in each other. But what's interesting about the story we're going to go into today with Jesus is that we're going to look at Jesus at a meal, but there is no table. It's a story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And this story is unlike most of the stories we find Jesus in a meal with. The other stories we've read so far have been more focused on who are the key players in the story. Like in the first meal, Jesus goes to Levi, Matthew, the tax collector's house. In the second story, he's at Simon the Pharisee's house. It also those other stories focus on who else is around the table, who's in the room, who's a part of the conversation. But the meal we're going to look at today is more centered on geography. Where is it? What's happening? And it's in a much more public setting. And how public this meal is probably what contributes to the fact that the story of the feeding of the 5,000, it appears in all 4 Gospels. That's something we don't always think about when we think about the Gospels, is how many of the stories happen in all of them. There's only 2 stories that happen in all 4 Gospels. The one we talk about a lot is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The other, though, is this one, the feeding of the 5,000. And so we're going to be looking at that story today in Luke chapter 9. So if you want to turn your Bibles to Luke 9, that's fine. But the way this event started was not by having a meal. There was no, hey, we're going to have dinner. Wouldn't it be cool if we all went out to this place? Have any of you seen the documentary on Netflix about Fire Island? Yeah, some of you have, some of you haven't. Basically, it was this party to end all parties that was going to go on at this island, and the guy lied about everything. There was no money, there was nothing out there, and people took these boats and they all went out there, and there was nothing, and they were all trapped on this island. Okay, it was a very poorly planned event if you were going to have a party and a meal and all that. Well, the way this event happens, no one went out to this area with the intent of having a meal. It began actually as Jesus taking his disciples to rest, because for the last maybe month or so, they've been on assignment. Jesus had sent them all over Galilee preaching and teaching. They even were given the ability to cast out demons and to heal people. And really what we see Jesus doing here is he's preparing them for the future. He's teaching these 12 people by apprenticeship to do the things he had been doing to this point, to speak the things that he spoke. And it's in Luke 9:10 that Jesus, it says, he wants to take them away. So previously he had sent them out, but now what Jesus is having them do is to withdraw, to rest. They need to unplug. The only problem is, even though Jesus was done with the crowds were not done with Jesus. In Luke 9:11, it says that when the crowds learned, they followed him. And he welcomed them and spoke to them the kingdom of God and cured those who had need of healing. And so here they are. Jesus has brought these 12 men out to relax and to rest after all the work that they've done. But the crowd won't let them. Not only does the crowd recognize Jesus, but when you read some of the other Gospels, you find out that because of the work the disciples have been doing, the people are starting to recognize the disciples by their work. And so now there's 13 people, like, hey, these 13 people, are those the ones we've heard about? It looks like it. I've seen this guy, I've seen this guy. And so no matter where they try to come from, no matter where they try to escape to, everyone recognizes this group of people. And the glaring thing that happens to me is that Jesus does not send them away. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, I'll be back in the office on Monday. You can call me then. My hours are between 9 and 3. He doesn't say, hey, have you all heard about boundaries? I just need a little me time. He doesn't say, hey, it's been a long time coming, but, I just, no press, no pictures. Let's just stay back. No, instead, Jesus does the thing that we see him do consistently throughout Luke. What did it say? He spoke to them about the kingdom. And he looks at them and he sees that there are people who are sick, and he begins healing those who are sick. And he does this, we're told, until, in verse 12 it says, he does this until the day began to wear away. This is how he spends his... This is supposed to be his R&R. This is supposed to be the time that they're resting and relaxing. And how does Jesus spend his one day off? Working. Until the day goes away. Jesus, it doesn't seem, can resist helping people. He can't resist telling them about the kingdom. He can't find it in his heart to send them away. I mentioned this story is in all four Gospels. When you read Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 6, verse 34, we understand why Jesus can't do it. We understand why he can't send them away. It says, when Jesus went ashore, he saw what? A great crowd, and he had compassion on them. Why? Because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Think about that. They have all, this is a desolate place. There's not a lot of hotels. There's no truck stop here. There's no reason anyone should be in this field unless they have come looking for Jesus and the disciples. I mean, how lost do you have to be inside that you're willing to walk 5, 10, 20 miles to listen to a preacher in the middle of nowhere? I mean, really think about that. Like, how much do you want Jesus? Like, if we didn't have the air conditioning and the roof over us, would you still show up to hear about Jesus? I sometimes wonder about that in the American church. Like, if we took away all the stuff and the screens and the lights and all that stuff, would Jesus still be enough for us to show up for? How desperate, though, are these people, and how desperate do you have to be that you have to find something? How desperate are you to find something more that you're willing to go out into the middle of nowhere in hopes that this one preacher is going to take care of you? How desperate are you that you don't even pack any food for the journey? You're so interested in finding this person that you do nothing to prepare to find him. And so even though the whole point was for the disciples to get some rest, this actually becomes a more involved trip than anything they did before. The disciples had been going out from town to town preaching. They had been staying in people's homes. They had been casting out demons. And here they thought, okay, we did some really cool work. Now they've come out into the middle of nowhere and they find out that they've got a bigger crowd than anyone they saw in any one of the towns. What should have been rest and relaxation, now more than 5,000 people have shown up. And now the disciples who are just looking to get a break are realizing that they have a logistical nightmare on their hands. What do you do with 5,000 people? You can't house them. You can't feed them. But I want you to pay attention because I think there's a tone in here. I don't think they're worried about the people. I don't think this is about compassion for them. Instead, I think they're worried about the problem that it causes them. What are we going to do with these people? What, you expect us to take care of these people? What, do we have to go into town and buy bread for this many people? What kind of bakery is even open right now? And so they come to Jesus and they say it like this. They say, hey, Jesus, you're not paying attention. Look at what's happening. We're tired. They need somewhere to go. Just stop talking and let's wrap this thing up. Have any of you ever had a friend who just doesn't know when to wrap things up and go home? Did someone point at me? Oh, no. Listen, hey, it's going to go longer now. I was at a friend's house once about 10 years ago, and he told me that what he likes to do when people are staying at his house for a long time, but they don't get the hint that they're supposed to go, is he says, well, let me pray for you before you go. And then he started praying for us, and then said, okay, have a good night. And I was like, oh, man, you told me what you were going to do, and then you did it to me? That's cold. And he says, do I need to start praying again? And I was like, oh, man. We don't talk much anymore. No. But could you imagine, like I'm in the middle of preaching, and then Tim just gets up here and he starts playing the guitar, you know? It's almost like how Frank Sinatra got played off the Oscars that one time in the middle of his speech, you know? Just like, okay, we're going to start playing the music. David, you should get the hint. Isn't it time for us to get communion? We have places to be, David. The disciples are basically trying to play the music in the middle of Jesus' sermon to cue communion. They do it in the name of the crowd. You know, Jesus, if you care about these people, send them away. This has gone on too long. But then Jesus surprises them. He turns to the crowd and he says to them in verse 13, you give them something to eat. Jesus says, their problem is your problem. Get to work. And the way Jesus says this isn't like this is a leadership meeting where you meet and you assess the problem and then figure out a solution. Jesus says, no, I'm telling you what to do. Get to work. And the disciples hear what Jesus says, and they say, we don't need to assess the situation. You're asking us to do something impossible. There's 12 of us. There's 5,000 of them. It's not like there's Walmart. There's no bakery open with food for 5,000, even if there was. We don't have the cash flow to buy this much food for people. All we have are 5 loaves and 2 fish. Any solution we have is a squirt gun on a forest fire. And there's a little bit of me that thinks that when they mention the 5 loaves and 2 fish, they think, okay, we found enough food for us, but there's not really enough food for anyone else. So we can't really share Jesus, otherwise there's not going to be enough for us. And Jesus says, obviously you're not hearing me. So let me show you. And he sits everyone down in groups of 50. And then Jesus gives his disciples the food and starts distributing it. And they'd come back and they say, okay, we distributed it. And Jesus says, oh, good, I have some more for you. Okay, we distributed it. Good, I have some more for you. And they're starting to probably count like, we passed 5 loaves about 20 loaves ago. What's happening? I've often pictured this miracle just in my mind in the same way that God made woman from man. Because it doesn't say that God took a rib out of Adam and then, whittled it, like he just sat on a tree stump and started, carving a bone. No, it actually says he pulls the woman from his side. And that's the same picture that I have here, that the bread is coming from the bread and the fish is coming from the fish. And just like he made two of everything, he continues and continues and continues, as if to say, I am the I am the one who spoke everything into being. And he keeps giving the food over and over and over again until we're told not just that everyone ate, but there were so many leftovers that there's 12 baskets of leftovers. No one left hungry. Now here's the interesting part. It's actually when you continue to read on in this gospel, like we're in Luke 9, right? And you continue to read on from verse 17, that there's another story that happens right after this one. And it's where Jesus asks the disciples who they think he is. And Peter, for the first time, says, you are the Christ. The way the story reads in Luke, it's the feeding of the 5,000 that reveals to Jesus' disciples who he is. For the first time, Jesus opens up to them about who he is, and also he then tells them what it means for him to be the Christ, and he predicts for the first time that he's going to be crucified, buried, and risen from the dead. But this conversation about who Jesus is a result of the table. It's a result of the meal that's shared with the 5,000. Now, there's a lot of things that we can walk away from in this meal with Jesus, but today I just want to share a couple of things that stood out to me from the meal that I've never noticed before. These are things that I think the meal should be shaping about the way we serve people, and I think it's also should be shaping us about the way we understand the Jesus we serve. And the first is this. I think as God's people, we have a really hard time with compassion. I think we have a hard time having a compassionate spirit towards people, and I don't think you can understand Jesus as the Christ without compassion. When needs come up, when people are in trouble, it is tempting us for us to go into the place in our brain that makes justifications for why we can't help them. We're tired. We already are doing a lot of work for some other people. We have some other things to do. Or we do it like the disciples and we come up with logistical reasons for why we can't help. Or, you know what really happens in a lot of Christian circles is we come up with biblical reasons not to help the people Jesus said to help. We even will go so far as to try to make it immoral that we would be helping people in some circumstances. I've heard Bible scholars and pastors say the only time Jesus ever did things for people was to make a point about who he was. They believe to be loving to people without preaching is like not telling people the truth. That if we're just loving people, then they won't get who Jesus is. And then what we do with that is we create labels about the ways we love people. And we'll put these big labels on it, like we'll call it the social gospel, to make it seem like it's heresy to have compassion on people for compassion's sake. Jesus said in Mark 7:9 that we sometimes have a fine way of rejecting God's commands to come up with our own traditions. Or maybe another way to say it is we find a clever way to disobey God just to protect our theology. And in the name of Jesus, we will often not love people and call it biblical. But let's talk about that anyways. That fear we have that people may not get Jesus if we're just being compassionate to them. Let's just look at this story. Jesus just spent the day preaching the kingdom to these people. And he has compassion and he feeds them, right? And then he sends the disciples out to feed everyone. And then he sends them out again to collect all the food. When the disciples go out to collect all of this food from people, What kinds of conversations do you think they had with the people they picked up the food from? Where did this come from? Right? Wouldn't you want to know? Who bought the bread? Who bought it? What kind of man can do this? Who is this man? How did Jesus do this? And that's the setting that Jesus has this conversation against with him being the Christ. It's when the disciples get back to Jesus that in Luke 9:18 through 19, Jesus says, it happened that as Jesus was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" He's saying, you just picked up all the food. What are people talking about? And they answered, John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets that's risen. The crowd just heard Jesus preach and were recipients of Jesus' compassion. No one is more truth and love than Jesus, right? And yet, how many people in the crowd understood who Jesus was after that? None of them. Think about that. Like, can you out-preach Jesus? Probably not. Can you out-compassion Jesus? Probably not. And yet, it doesn't stop Jesus from talking about the kingdom, and it doesn't stop Jesus from being compassionate. We spend a lot of times trying to guess how will people take what we're going to do. And I think that's a mistake. Because if you're trying to always determine the worthiness of what you do based on some psychic premonition of how someone's going to take what you do, you will never do anything. You can't know what someone's going to do with what you do for them. All you can do is be obedient to Jesus and be loving to them, be compassionate to them. We're worried that people won't get Jesus when the people who heard Jesus didn't get Jesus. And listen to me, I 100% expect that people won't get Jesus by what we're doing out in Andover rebuilding their lives. I 100% expect that there's people that we have helped out there that will not understand why we did it, what we're doing it for, what motivates us to go out there and live the kind of lives we're living in that community. But there is something that I do expect to happen from us serving people in this way, that I do expect from us becoming compassionate. Because there was someone from the feeding of the 5,000 who finally did understand who Jesus was, and that's Peter. For all of the things the world didn't get, it was only when Jesus fed the people from compassion that Peter finally registered who Jesus was. You see, we get worried about whether or not people get Jesus in the way we love them. I'm worried if we will get Jesus if we don't. I believe one of the principal ways we have a deeper understanding of who Jesus is when we join Jesus in serving people. I don't believe we can really say we understand Jesus if we don't understand that Christ is not just a theological title, but it's a description of the compassion that God pours out on us in the person of Jesus. Christ is not a title, it is a description of the heart of God as he tries to rescue us. And so when we come to the table with Jesus, we come ready not to feed ourselves, but to feed others. Because that's what it means to actually be at the table with Jesus. We're there to serve. But a second takeaway I have with this story is that Jesus expected his disciples to play a role in feeding these people, even when the problem was too big for them to handle. That it was their job to help, even when it didn't seem like they could. And it stands out to me that the disciples didn't want to help until they understood what the solution could be. Have you ever had that? Like a problem comes your way and you're like, well, what can I do about it? And so now it's not your problem anymore. You kind of check out of the problem. That's how I see them. I see that they want to know, how is this supposed to be fixed before they do anything. They wanted to know how things were going to work out before they did what Jesus said, whereas Jesus wants them to get involved and let God figure out how to solve the problem. What I see here is that a lot of times you have to help even when you can't. You have to help even when you can't. You have to obey God before you expect to see how God provides. And I thought about finding clever ways to explain this, but instead I just want to tell you the story of what God's been teaching me the last couple weeks. When the tornado hit Andover, I was there the next day, and I stood amongst my old neighbors' houses, and I had no idea what we were supposed to do about anything. I was completely overwhelmed. I'm having my son's friends walk up to me, and their homes are gone. But what we chose to do the next day here Sunday was to pray. And while we prayed here and while we sat here and we were concerned about the people out there, we received messages from one of the neighborhoods to come and help. And so that Sunday after church, we sent people to the store to buy chips and drinks and food, to buy tents. And what you need to understand is we didn't have money set up for any of it. We didn't have a Andover Tornado Relief Fund. We said, hey, we'll take some money for it and we'll figure out what to do with it. But there was no plan, guys. We showed up, we cleaned, we bought tents, water, food. And it was in that time period that Mason got a hold of us because he was looking for a church to partner with his disaster relief crew with IDES. But it ended up working out because we were some of the first people on the scene, and we got to be his eyes and ears before he got there so that he would know what to do. And then the needs came. People needed homes. They needed food. They needed labor. We found storage units and rented them. We paid security deposits on people's homes for rentals. Some of you did dozens and dozens and dozens of loads of laundry for people. A lot of you think you have a lot of laundry when you have like 3 baskets full. You have no clue what it's like when you have to do all of your laundry at the same time. And again, we didn't have money for that, but it was the right thing to do. People needed taken care of. And within a week, you all generously given somewhere around $4,000. And some partner churches came in and gave generously, but then we were trying to figure out, how do we feed these people who have no power? And then Medes gets in contact with us, and they hand us $8,500 of free gift cards to give to the victims of the tornado. $8,500. And then IDES comes back in and says, hey, we can help rebuild these lives. And they give us $30,000 of sheds to build this week. And so we went out and we started building sheds this last week, and these people began to start reclaiming their lives. And then on Thursday, I got a call I did not expect at all. Crossroads Christian Church in Shawnee, Kansas, who helped donate to start our church back, however many years ago that was, has been so moved by what we're doing, they called to tell us they're sending us $10,000 so we could help the victims of the tornado. Some of us want God to show us a solution to what the problems are out there before we go to work. That's not how it works. What God wants is for us to obey Him, to be obedient, to say, I will go, I will serve, I will help, and trust that He's going to multiply the loaves when they're needed. Sometimes we don't do anything because we look at the size of the need and think it's too big, that we have something but it's not going to be enough. I'm telling you, give it to God anyways, and it will become enough. And even more. So how do we do this? How do we get to this place where we can trust God to multiply? How do we get to this place where we could trust God to be the provider that He is? How do we get to this place where when Jesus says, hey, step in and help in a problem, that we just go? And I think it begins with the last question Jesus asked. I think that has to be the first question we ask, and that's, who do we say Jesus is? I'm telling you, the way you answer this question determines everything you do from that point forward. If you don't believe that Jesus is the Christ, that He is there to save people, if you don't believe Jesus is compassionate on those who are in need, if you don't see people the way Jesus saw people, if you don't understand Jesus in that way, Jesus is just someone you're going to talk about on the weekends. You're just going to go to some really riveting studies where you study the meaning of the word Christos, but you don't understand the meaning of what that means in terms of compassion and salvation and hope. Who do you say Jesus is? I'm telling you, some of us want to make sure everyone's right about Jesus, but we don't want to do right by people. You don't get who Jesus is. You don't get who Jesus is as long as He's just someone you talk about. 2, I would tell you to be compassionate for compassion's sake. I don't see Jesus saying, well, who did they say I was? Well, now let's feed the 5,000. They got it right. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, we'll feed these people. But that's the way we are sometimes in churches. Do they understand us? Do they understand what we understand? Are they where we are? Are they spiritually here? How serious are they? There is no qualification. There is no qualification for who deserves your compassion. None. That's like there's this story Jesus told once about a good Samaritan. And it starts out with a lawyer who says, well, who's my neighbor? Who should I really love? And at the end of it, Jesus doesn't say who the neighbor was. He says who acted like a neighbor. You don't think who deserves love. You think, am I a loving person? I'm telling you, learn to be compassionate for compassion's sake. And here's why. The reason we follow Jesus is He selflessly loved. When He goes to the cross, He doesn't qualify who He's dying for. He's dying for everyone. We don't come to Jesus because there's a gimmick and a catch and a hoax or there's some trade-off. We come to Jesus because the God of the universe literally held on to nothing because He thought we were worth something. And the second you start to qualify and nitpick and start to play through people's lives, you're really trying to say, are you into my standard? Do you look at me in the right way? Before I think you're worthy of having any of my love. Love doesn't make distinctions like that. It chooses to love. People will only get the sacrificial love of Jesus when you are truly giving freely to others. But finally, learn to say yes to helping people before you have the means or the knowledge to know how to help. Just learn to say yes to helping people. I didn't know how to do any of the stuff that we did this week. Like I could reverse engineer it and say, well, first we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this. And it could sound really smart and great and compassionate and wonderful. But really what it was there's a problem. I don't know. Something's on fire. What do we do? I don't know. Try to put it out. With what? If you have to figure it out first, you will stop yourself from helping in every situation. If you have to figure it out first, you will talk yourself out of helping people. So learn to say yes to helping people before and let God figure it out. Guys, we just watched God do this. For the last 2 weeks, we watched God, 3 weeks, we watched God do this again and again and again. Single moms are moved into homes right now. I didn't have a plan for that. People's things are in storage right now. I didn't have a plan for that. But if you just learn to say yes, you will watch God provide again and again and again. Put yourself in a position to say yes to God and to step in to help. We're going to have a time of communion, and this is a time that Tim does play me off. That he does play as we go to this table. And here's the thing: this is a table that we get to see how the compassion of God has multiplied us. Because here we are, all of us from different places, different backgrounds. There's no reason that all of us would be gathered into this room if it were not for the compassion and the grace of Jesus Christ. And we get to come to this table, and I'm thankful it doesn't involve fish, but it does involve bread. It involves bread and grape juice, and what we do week after week is we remember that Jesus is our provider, that He is our God and our King, but that we are recipients of the compassion of God. That you and I are sitting here because we have been loved with a love that we do not understand and that we could never express. And it's because Jesus gave everything, that we now get to be a part of distributing that love to other people. And even though the loaf has been multiplied to all of us, we all get to still come back and be a part of that one body of Jesus. And so I want you to challenge yourself this week to be thinking about how can you be someone who says yes to God, that answers the call and meets the needs of those around you. You can't join Jesus at the table without seeing the people that He sees. And so I'm going to pray, and we invite you to these tables. We have 2 inside and 1 in the back. And we invite you to come eat and to come drink and to come remember Jesus and remember all the ways that He's provided for you. To remember all the ways that He's given to you. To remember everything He sacrificed for you. If you're new, we're glad you came. We'd love for you to fill out the bottom of one of those bulletins. That's just a connection card. Just helps us to get in contact with you. And it also helps you to be in contact with us. We'd love to just be able to communicate with you. Also love to connect with you and hear your story. On the back side of that, there's a place with some prayer requests. And I got to tell you, there's probably plenty of things that you all have that, yeah, it may not be tornado damage, but there's plenty of things that you're going through that you don't know how God is going to redeem and restore and to fix those things. And what I want to challenge you to do today is to put a prayer request down and actually give something to God that He has to do. To actually put something in front of God that only He can answer, that only He could provide for. And then I challenge you to just walk by faith and to step into that and see what God does. To see how God answers it. And I think it's going to surprise you. I don't think any of the disciples that day, as they held 5 loaves and 2 fish, ever imagined that 5,000 people were going to be stuffed that day. But if you're never putting something in front of God, if you're never trusting God with what you have going on in your life, then you're never going to learn what it means to be satisfied in Him. But you can take those cards, you can put them into the baskets as you go by. It's also a time for your tithes and offerings. It is just amazing to watch how generous you all have been. When you support what's going on here, you are supporting the work of the kingdom. You're supporting the work that's happening in Andover. You're supporting church planting work around the world. And so I'm going to pray, and Tim's going to play. And while he's playing, we invite you to come up, come eat, come drink, come put in those cards, come put in your tithes and offerings. But then we're going to sing to Jesus.